So I just wanted to welcome you, Tesha, and to say that you're the director of Project Counter. Do I have that right?
I am well, as of this week, we
Oh,
are using our legal name, which is Countermetrics, not Project Counter.
oh,
So you'll see some branding changes and such like over the next few months.
okay. The director of Countermetrics,
Metrics.
which is an initiative to develop standardized guidelines for tracking and reporting the usage of digital resources in libraries. And just Tasha, you're a leading expert in this area. You've been helping to advance the project's mission for a little while now. 2 years in that role, but before that too, I think, right? From what I was reading.
Yeah, I wrote the original friendly guides for Counter in 2015 and got sucked into being a volunteer at that time and have never been allowed to leave.
Well, we're glad to have you then with your expertise, and you'll be leading a session today, providing us insights into how to better utilize these resources for our work. So I will give it over to you and try and find my mute button here. There we go.
Thank you. So hopefully everyone can see my screen and the subtitles. If they are causing problems, let me know. I will turn them off. I usually have them on to help our audio impaired colleagues. So I am not going to go into too much detail on the basics of working with counter reports. What I want to try and get across for you guys today are answers to some of the questions that I know have been coming up in your previous discussions, but also some tips and tricks for getting more out of your existing reports. So as a reminder, and Francine has already said, we've been around for more than 20 years now. We're a not-for-profit membership organisation, so membership fees are what enable me to do my job and be here to speak to you all today. We've had more than 280 publishers adopt the Counter standard from every part of the world except Antarctica at the moment. And that's not just your typical books and journals publishers, but also news, multimedia, interactive tool publishers, and so on. And of course, that proliferation of types of content is part of what drives the changes that we've had to make over the years to the Counter Code of Practice. So right here, I'm going to ask you to put in the chat your best guess as to how frequently Counter puts out a major release. So one of the ones that's sort of a breaking release to the Code of Practice. And I'm going to open the chat and see who comes closest. Okay, so I'm seeing some who are correct. I'm seeing a lot who are thinking we're faster than we are. We have averaged one major release every 5 years, and we're committed to not doing it any more frequently than that, partly because it's an awful lot of work for libraries, partly because it's even more work for publishers, but mostly because I would quit. It's frankly, it's such a heavy lift for me and the Counter team that actually doing it more than once every 5 years it's unfair to ask our volunteers to do that. So that's how frequently we're going with. Now, that's not to say there won't be fixes in the interim. So a very lovely librarian, just after we published release 5.1, contacted me to say there were typos. So we do fix releases, things that are not breaking changes in the interim, just when somebody finds an actual problem. So there will be one of those coming this year. Moving not so swiftly on. So hopefully you all are very well aware of the 3 flavors of countermetrics. So I'm not going to go into how these are counted, how they are actually built up. But I know that there was a comment in one of your last meetings about whether searching all databases might be skewing search numbers. So there was a comment, excuse me while I read this verbatim. An EBSCO database was showing 1,277 searches over the year. I think search all databases was being selected by our user because there's no way somebody would look at this by itself. Okay, that last little bit was me adding something on. It's not verbatim. So this is a common issue that we come across with search questions. There are multiple different types of search metric in Counter, and what you will see somewhat depends on the user interface that the platform provider has implemented. So in the platform report, you'll see searches platform. That's not going to duplicate anything. You will count one search across the whole platform, no matter what. In the database report, the DR, you will see either searches regular or searches automated. Now, searches regular is what they will report if the user interface allows the user to choose one or more databases from a list. It won't tell you whether they have chosen one or more databases from the list, but they have the facility to do that. By contrast, searches automated is search activity within a platform where the user cannot select from the list of databases. So in a situation where you're thinking that one database is having abnormally high usage, or all of the databases on a platform are showing the same amount of automated search usage, or sorry, the same amount of search usage, you should have a look and see if it searches regular or searches automated. If it searches automated, that's a user interface artifact more than it is necessarily a reflection on the value of a specific database. Have I successfully answered that question? It was a database that had no content at all and was activated on the database list by accident and yet had 2,000 searches. So yes, that sounds like it's a searches automated situation. And it's just, you know, this thing is live, you can search. Cool. The other thing that there was a comment on was, and I apologize if I've misinterpreted this, the turnaways aren't actually counting turnaways, or each book download is multiplied by 13. Right. Let's start with the turnaways, the denial metrics. There are two types of denials in Counter. There is, you don't have a license to read this at all, and that will be tracked as a no license turnaway. Typically, if there is some kind of free content, you'll see the investigations, and then denials will be when somebody has tried to access the full text. The other type of turnaway that you might have is limit exceeded, and that's where you've got a concurrency cap. So you can only have, say, 10 users. I know that there are some publishers that consider turnaways to be, you can't get into the database at all, not you've been able to do your investigations, but you can't read your full text. So I suspect that's what is meant by the turnaways aren't actually counting turnaways, because people have been able to get in and see something, just not the whole content. If that's not what they were saying, please get me involved in that conversation, because I would want to go in and have a deeper dive into their auditors' reports on turnaways at that point. The comments from vendors about book downloads being multiplied by 13 because of the numbers of chapters. I am going to come on to that when I give you a brief introduction to release 5.1, because that's actually a really important factor of what fed into development of 5.1. And then the last comment was about comparing Counter reports to EBSCO reports or other bespoke publisher reports. And I have a slide later about extending Counter reports and the non-Counter reports that are available to people. So we'll get into that there. But that was all from one comment, so I figured I'd address it in one go. Moving on, I'm sure you are all familiar with the 4 Counter reports. Hopefully, if you have ever heard me speak before, you will have heard me say, please please use the counter reports and not the standard views of the counter reports. And the reason that I say this is that I have tracked the questions that have come into me, and those from librarians in well over 50% of cases are answered by, have you looked at the title report instead of the TRJ1 or TRB1? And the reason for that is that the standard views are extremely limited. They strip out a lot of data types. They strip out a lot of metrics. So if you have a title report from a large aggregated database that includes not just books and journals, but also patents or major reference works or anything like that, anything that isn't just a book or a journal will not show up on the TRB1 and the TRJ1. So you are losing all of that usage from your reporting. Equally, one of the things that has been asked repeatedly is, why am I seeing usage in TRJ3 that doesn't show up in TRJ1? And it's because TRJ3 includes investigations and TRJ1 doesn't. If you just had the title report, you'd be able to see all the usage, and you can filter it as you need to just the data types you want or just the metric types you want. So if you send me a question and the answer is, have you checked the title report, you'll be added to my list of how many people I've sent that message to the point that it is now a pre-canned response in my mailbox. I can take you through a tabular report. So if you would like to see like the ins and outs of a tabular report, I will do that. But I know that you'd rather get into the more nitty-gritty, so I'm not swapping unless you ask me to. But what we will do is go through the key things that I have had people ask me how to do. So the I want tos is what I call them. So I want to figure out the return on my investment in journal subscriptions. Should I use unique title requests or total item investigations, or which metric? I would always say, if you're looking at the return on investment in a journal subscription or a book purchase or whatever it might be, use the title report and look at the unique item requests. If it's a book, use the unique title requests, but typically for anything that is journal, patent, whatever, it's the unique item request. You can slice that by year of publication and by month of usage and by access model. So if you are only interested in looking at the use of controlled content, so that's subscription content, in calendar year 2023 for stuff that was published in calendar year 2023, you can slice and dice your title report to show you that information. And then you can divide that limited number of unique item investigations by the subscription price for the year, and that will give you an accurate cost per download, as it were, for the subscription. You can do this sort of for open access as well, but that requires having global reports, which not everybody has released yet, and I can talk a bit more about those under release 5.1. Oh yes, the other thing, this calculation will also work for calculating the return on investment in a database over the course of a year, and so on and so forth. I want to know how many users have accessed a book in full. This is definitely the unique title requests, because they are book-specific metrics that don't care about number of chapters in the book and so on. Again, you can slice that by the year or month of usage and by the access model. So if you've got a mixed model book, which is partly open access and partly subscription. You can slice that if you want to. But the simple, I want to know total usage of this book, you're looking at the unique title requests over the period of time that you are interested in. And the third very common one, should I subscribe to this database? Does it matter? Can I safely ignore it? I would, in that case, use the database report and filter for metric type no license. So that's the denial metric type that I mentioned earlier for you don't have a subscription here at all. Now, all counter reports can be sliced and diced in lots of different ways. So if I jump back to my earlier slide, which is here, you can see that you can slice by title. So this is a title report sample. I don't know if you can see it clearly. You can slice by the title, you can slice by the data type, the year of publication, the access type, the access method. So you can see if anyone's doing text and data mining. You can slice by metric type. That's all of these attributes down in the main body of the report. But you can also pre-filter to show all kinds of different things. So all of these attributes down here can also be report filters to limit the size of the report that you are downloading. Is this clear as mud to everybody? So moving on, because I know you know how Counter has been working, I spend a lot of time reminding everybody that release 5.1 is coming soon. And now I can say it's coming next year. So this will be what we require from publishers from January of 2025. Now, I know in the past, we haven't had every publisher ready on the day that we have said they need to be ready by. And I'm not going to promise that I can perform a miracle and make every publisher compliant from January 2025 as we would want them to be. What I can tell you is that I have spoken with every single counter compliant report provider. All bar one of them is already working on their release 5.1 compliance. Most of them are targeting the middle of this year, and they will continue to offer release 5 until the end of March next year, as they are required to do, but they are planning to get release 5.1 up and running early because they want it out the door just as much as we do. It won't be perfect. There is no such thing as a perfect counter release, but we are aiming to be ahead of the curve this time. As you can see, that there was a fairly long lead time to working out what went into release 5.1, and then we gave everybody 18 months from the point where we published it to it becoming sort of the enforceable code. As I said earlier, I know that these are a lot of work for everybody, so we do try and keep them as small and as infrequent as possible. So while this is a change, it is by no means as big and as scary as the jump from release 4 to release 5. So please rest easy. You're not going to have to learn a completely new vocabulary. Our reports are the same, our metrics are the same, the way we measure things hasn't changed. But we have tried to optimize what was release 5 into something that works better for our bibliodiverse publishing industry as it is today, and to really reflect the proliferation of open content, so OA. And we also tried to clean up some of the mess. So key changes for you. Item as the unit of reporting. So this is coming back to the question about books and journals that I mentioned earlier, and where publishers want you to multiply your book metrics by the number of chapters. So under release 5, if a user chose to download a whole book because it was convenient, that would be counted as one item request, even if you could also download all 15 of the chapters in that book independently. So you'd get one item request and also one title request, which kind of meant the title metrics were a bit pointless. In release 5.1, we have stopped treating books as a special case. And if you download a book that has 15 chapters that are also available separately, that is 15 item requests, but it's still only one title request. So you're still getting that deduplication to the level of the book, so you can see usage of the book as a title. Please tell me if I'm making any sense. I'm very aware that I'm rabbiting at this point. Questions? I can see a thumbs up, which is making me very happy. Cool. I'm going to move on then. Oh, there's something in the chat. Can I repeat that part? Yes. So I've actually got a table. If you go to the Counter Media Library, there is a table in the friendly guide introducing the changes in release 5.1. There is a table that shows you line by line the effect of this change to item as unit of reporting. So in release 5, everything that isn't a book, you count by the item. So that is, you know, one journal article is one item. And if you download 10 journal articles, that's 10 item requests. For books, if you downloaded a whole book with 10 or 15, say it's got 10 chapters, downloaded the whole book, it would only count as one item request. It would also count as one title request because that's how we're set up. That was really difficult for publishers. It was also causing real problems for librarians who wanted to know about usage of chapters, particularly for open access books. So we've got rid of the special treatment for books. And now, under 5.1, if a user downloads the whole book with 10 chapters, that's 10 item requests, but still only one title request. And when we get into the Q&A later, I'll dig out the media library link and send you that link for the thing from Mandy. Does this apply to journals? So journals have always counted every article individually. If you can download the entire journal issue, articles have always been individually counted as items. It really was special treatment for books that we're now getting rid of. So, okay, Mandy says perfect, which is brilliant. Moving on then, the next change, and I'm going to apologize here, we changed the access type definitions, which is how we talk about whether something is controlled, so subscription content, or open or free to read. So we used to call open OA Gold, and we decided that it's none of our business as Counter what the business model is for making something open access, what the license is, because I know some people will say that only CC BY is open access. It's not my business to mandate that. And we also had real problems for repositories who wanted to be able to correctly classify things as open access if they were able to be opened after an embargo. So we've just now said it's open. It's up to the platform to define this within the bounds of our definition. So there is no more OA delayed because it's not our business. OA delayed was never implemented. It was always a reserved feature for later implementation, but we got rid of that. We also have free to read. This is something that has historically been only available for repositories who have a lot of free but not open access content. But publishers were being asked by their library colleagues to clearly outline in reports how much of the controlled content was actually free. So this is things like the COVID materials that people opened up for a year or so. These things were free to read, and librarians wanted to be able to account for that in their cost per use downloads, cost per use calculations. So free to read is now available for publishers to use as well. Thinking back to my please use the title report, not the TRJ one or TRB one. The TRJ one is still only controlled content. So not only is it excluding open access, it's also excluding the free to read. So you really are missing a lot of information by using the TRJ one or B1. Next up, we have expanded the list of data types. I mentioned bibliodiversity. We used to have 14 data types in Counter. And when we compared it to, for example, DataCite or Crossref, we were very much more restrictive. So we have expanded that list of data types to 28. That is going to massively help identify what your users are actually using. But we've also made some clarifications that mean the old section type attribute that was almost never used has gone away. So that's now not something that you will see if you ever used it at all in the first place. And then lastly, the counter harvesting API, Sushi, and its associated JSON schema. We were very aware that using IP authentication to allow people to harvest counter reports was really fragile. And we had lots of libraries complaining that things were falling over frequently because their IP ranges were changing and that information hadn't made it through to the authentication system and so on and so forth. We're now saying your customer ID, your requester ID are still there, they haven't changed. And those publishers who want to replace the old IP authentication should use API key, which is much more robust. We've also made some changes to make Sushi a bit more useful. So you can now, for example, check to see if a service is live without logging in first, which I know is something that used to bother quite a few people. And we've made the JSON reports that you pull from that harvesting tool much more compact and OpenAPI 3.1 compliant. So they're much easier to work with and to validate because they're not a weird bespoke schema anymore. They still look like counter reports. They're still very easy to convert into the old release 5 if you really want to for some reason, but they're smaller and more compact. And you know, I was able to make sample reports without pulling my hair out. So it's good. There were other changes. Registry links in headers. So the counter registry was launched at the beginning of January last year as a way to let libraries check the audit status of publishers. I know this is something that you guys are interested in. I'm also aware, because I've been sent some links, that some publishers have gone and borrowed a counter logo. And I'm going to say right now, these are very dubious publishers who are on lots of predatory publisher lists. This is not anyone that I would consider to be reputable. But some people have been borrowing counter logos to pretend that they are counter compliant. If there is no registry link in the report header and there's no record in the registry, then your publisher, your report is not a compliant report. That's the simple option. We've also made a series of recommendations around open access reporting, and that's what I mean by global item reports. So these are designed, so these are the item reports that you're already familiar with, but global. So they're not for your specific library, your specific institution. They are all usage around the world, whether or not that usage can be tied back to any institution. So for an open access piece of content, obviously the impact of that is how widely it is read, or partly how widely it is read around the world. We want to help publishers show that. We want to help libraries and funders prove that their investment in open is giving them a return. And we can do that by showcasing normalized, rationalized usage metrics for worldwide usage. And, you know, that's what we're recommending. PLOS have already got global item reports, and I know that there's quite a few others getting on with it. Yes, Heather, I absolutely agree. It's exciting for authors as well. And I've got a little project on the go to, so hopefully you may have heard of the Open Access Ebook Usage Data Trust, which is a Mellon funded project to aggregate usage for open access ebooks. But I'm also working with a fairly wide group of publishers who want to really rethink syndicated usage and how they can provide visibility of total usage on all different platforms for the same piece of content. So hopefully that will come through soonish. I make no promises. There's a lot of other projects competing for attention. Other changes that we've made are around audit. And I know that one of the questions that you guys had was, how do we actually make sure that publishers do what they're supposed to do? And I have got a whole slide about how we work with them. But audit isn't perfect. It is a snapshot in time, and it can only test at that given moment. So there's, it's not flawless. And I do very much encourage anyone who spots something dubious to get in touch with me, ideally to get in touch with the publisher and copy me, because there's only so much I can do without going straight to the publisher. But the more libraries are pushing back on anything that they think is peculiar, the more I have the power to push for compliance. So just as a reminder, big things that are changing for you. You're going to have much more open access metric usage, and you're going to have to think about your sushi harvesting and how you're ingesting those reports. If anyone wants my standard 5-point plan for how to upgrade, review the documentation, assess your systems, identify the gaps between your systems and the documentation, do your necessary dev work, check to see whether it's worked, and if need be, go around the cycle again. After 20 years of doing technical updates, that's my standard protocol now. Right, and yeah, if in doubt, contact me with my shiny new email address. So here is where I wanted to focus more of the time, and I'm aware that I'm already at 1:30, so I'm sorry. Compliance. So there was a question about, how do I work with vendors on compliance? How much leeway do publishers have in interpreting the data they collect or setting up interfaces to maximize usage? So we're going to start with leeway in interpreting data. There really isn't leeway in interpreting data. There's a huge amount of information in the code of practice about how things should be counted and tracked and interpreted. But user interface effects are a thing. So one of the reasons, or a primary reason, that we have the unique metrics, so that's your unique item investigations, unique item requests, and unique title requests, is that they massively reduce the impact of user interface effects. So if you think about, and I apologies, I do go to journals quite often as my examples, just because I've done a lot of time in journals. If you think about an OA journal, which defaults to showing the user the full text HTML of an article, going from Google Scholar directly to that full text HTML will automatically trigger one investigation plus one request. If the user then downloads the PDF as well, that will trigger a second request. So that's 2 total item requests. We deduplicate that, or we require publishers to deduplicate that as one unique item request. So if you really want to minimize the effect of people playing with their user interfaces, unique metrics are definitely the way to go. When it comes to searches, this is a bit of a complicated one. And what I will say is that in the 8 years that I have been involved with Counter, God, nearly 9 years that I have been involved with Counter, we have had at least one blazing row every year about search metrics, because this is to a very large extent dependent on the technology stack that the publisher has implemented. So some publishers, you run a search, if you then filter it, it's not running a new search, it's just getting rid of some stuff, it's hiding some stuff in the front end. Other publishers, you can run the exact same search and apply the exact same filter, but the back end is running a completely fresh search. So you will see on the first publisher where they're just hiding some stuff, not rerunning the search, that would be one search. On the second publisher where it triggers a whole new back-end process, that's 2 searches. That is very difficult for us to do anything about, because we can't mandate any particular kind of search technology. It's not our business to do that. What we do is, when it comes to things like the audit, we pretty thoroughly destruct test how those searches are working. So if we know that filtering counts as a new search in the technology, we do a whole load of extra filter tests and see what happens and make sure that what is then reported back to the auditors as a counter report tallies exactly with the activities that the auditors have done themselves in the user interface. So that's sort of answering that question. So in addition to the audit, which is this once a year manual process, we have something called the validation tool. And this is available to you guys as well. So if you have something coming through that you're not sure about, you can run any report you please through our validation tool. And if it's not compliant, you'll see. So this is not about the numbers necessarily, though there are some number checks in there. It's about technical compliance. Is this in the right structure? Are, the number of unique metrics always lower than the number of total metrics for the same item? It's the real basics. And we recommend that every publisher uses the validation tool quarterly. We make them do it before the audit, and if there's any problems, they have to fix it before the audit can start. I've told you about the registry. So there's a very clear flag on every record in the registry about whether something is compliant. So they've got a currently valid audit, whether they're currently being audited. So you can see, what the audit cycle is. As of last week, we have a fail flag, which before was sort of a little bit more discreet. Now it is an actual red fail flag that says, guys, you're ballsed up. And that's kind of the only real consequence for non-compliance, which I know is a bit of a problem. In terms of how we work, counter staffing is 20 hours a week of me, plus 7 hours a week since just this month. She's only just started, of my member engagement person, who is wonderful. But as you can imagine, we are incredibly reliant on volunteers. So I hugely appreciate what my volunteers do, and I am not going to ask my volunteers to come down and play the heavy with non-compliant publishers. The best I can do is nag them. And actually, the thing that I have found much, much more effective than me going to a publisher and saying, why aren't you counter compliant, is librarians going and saying, we're paying you all this money, we want our counter reports, please. And because you guys hold the purse strings, you actually have the power. And I know this is a very weird thing for a recovering publisher to tell you, that the librarians hold the power in this relationship. Sorry, just my water bottle is making very strange noises. The other question that came up that kind of fits within this context is spikes in usage. So under section 7 of the code, we have some very clear guidelines about what counts as an upward or downward spike in usage. And if you are seeing something that falls outside of those, please get in touch with me and let me know. We do have within the registry a notifications tool. So I know some publishers have seen, for example, some strange cyber attacks which have created a load of fake usage associated with particular accounts, and they've put those notifications in the registry and tried to say to libraries, you know, please beware, this is coming from your account, it looks valid, but we can't necessarily filter it out immediately. So that's something just to be aware of. And then the last one, how do you demonstrate the value of a library using Counter? And it's not the last one, it's the last but one. I'm going to say right now, metrics, handle with care. Nobody should be using a metric by itself. It's you know, it's no more a way to value a library than it is a way to value a researcher. But you can obviously be looking at subscription ROI, and it's something you're already doing. You can use it as open access ROI in a similar way. So if you can get hold of your global item reports from publishers, you can then do a similar calculation to the cost per download, but working out your global usage divided by what you've paid in an APC or your share of a transformative deal. I know this is something that I've worked on. So the 20 hours a week that I'm not working for Counter, I'm a consultant for not-for-profit publishers doing OA transitions. And with one of them, I got hold of their global item reports and I worked out the average cost per download for an APC. And it was, I think, something in the region of about 20 cents in the first year after publication. Because this is open content, it can be used by anyone, anywhere. And the university was able to show that this investment in content was getting real usage around the world, which leads me on very nicely to faculty impact, because I mean, you mentioned this in the chat. Faculty really like numbers. Researchers love being able to say, I got, you know, X number of citations, or I published Y number of book chapters last year. Being able to give them a global usage metric for the stuff that they have published is really helpful, particularly if it can be broken down geographically, which some publishers are choosing to do. As I've already said, there's limited ways to use Counter to evaluate user behavior, and that is because Counter is privacy protective by design. We will never include in a Counter report the number of users or the times at which they were using content or anything like that. However, you can extend the Counter code of practice, and this is something that a lot of publishers are looking to do as sort of a research project if they can find partners to work with them. So this would be code extensions on this chart. So if you are, for example, really interested in finding out which departments within your university are using content at particular times, if they're coming in, if they've got clearly defined IP ranges, that's fine. But if they're coming in through Shibboleth, then you can share the EduPerson tags to say, you know, this department, or this is a researcher, this is a student, whatever it might be. You could really find a lot more information about what your users are doing within that publisher's platform. And that's completely valid and in line with the code of practice. We have a whole section on how to do extensions to the code to allow people to do what they want to do. And that's not necessarily publishers, because most publishers don't want to do extra Counter stuff if they don't have to. But it can be really helpful for the library side. There are also an awful lot of custom reports. So I know there was a question about using EBSCO's homegrown reports to get meaningful information. I know nothing about publishers' homegrown reports. They are very specifically not counter reports, and they are not something with which I concern myself, because frankly, just keeping on top of counter seems quite enough at the moment. But I am aware that a lot of the bigger publishers in particular do offer additional sort of bespoke reporting tools. I'm afraid I can't help you a huge amount with those. All I will say is that they are not likely to be including the kind of normalized metrics that you would see from a counter report. KBART, I know, gets raised as a bit of a challenge because I know a lot of people want to be able to compare their holdings with their usage and see what content has not been used at all. We used to have zero usage in counter reports in release 4 of the Code of Practice. Not a single publisher was able to pass the zero usage tests within the audits because they were, it was such a complicated piece of engineering, because to be able to say, right, we know what your holdings are, we know what your usage is, and now we're going to slot in the extras for where your zero usage is, just required a level of complexity that they weren't able to meet. So they would either give you a list of every single title and show as zero usage the ones that you hadn't used, or they would leave out zero usage altogether. KBART was NISO's solution to that, or part of NISO's solutions to that. So you can now compare your holdings with your usage through that, but we're not reintroducing zero usage because we just have no way of practically implementing it for any publisher without forcing them to automatically fail an audit for where they haven't had any usage. Am I making any sense? Hopefully, yes. Cool. The last bit of sort of non-counter reporty stuff that I want to flag is syndicated content. So this is what I mean when if you think about EBSCO, they hold either abstracted content or full text content from dozens, if not hundreds, of other publishers. If you're using the content on the EBSCO host platform, great. If you're also seeing usage from the source publisher, that's also great. But there's no current mechanism to bring together all of the usage of that content from every platform in one place. And it is something that we do want to address. As I said, there's the OA eBooks Usage Data Trust looking at this for an OA ebook perspective, but it's something we really should be looking at more broadly across the full publishing industry. So I think that's that. Any other questions that I have missed, Francine? We have 10 minutes for live Q&A, and I'm just going to give you the link. Everything is at projectcounter.org at the moment, except for me, I'm at countermetrics.org.